Listen to this, get a load of this. My favorite sound. Look at this thing, man, it's crazy. That's a gigantic horse. That's the biggest bit I've ever seen. Jeez, that's a monster, look at this. Yeah, look at the size of this horse bit right here. This was one of those like Belgian draft horses. Like this thing was so big that being next to it would probably be scary if you weren't used to being around those giant horses. But there was probably a team of these horses that would go back and forth on this field, plowing and planting and harvesting, and like that's ridiculous. So yesterday I was studying a map, and on the map I saw that there was a barn out here back in about 1872. There was a barn. Anyway, so I come out here and the whole place is just littered with surface finds. I'll show you in a second. Yeah, so here we have just a scrap of old brass or something like that, but in any case this whole place is littered with surface finds. I'll show you some of them. It looks pretty promising. Over here we have a brick, which is a very good sign. And then here's really good evidence that there was a barn here at one time, because that's an old brick. I got a whole collection of surface finds over here. This is a mixing bowl. It's like an earthenware, stoneware mixing bowl. Good pieces of evidence here that this is a very old site, 1860s at least. Now here we have freshwater oyster shells. Now people definitely ate the freshwater oysters out of the river, but the other use for these was that they took the oyster shells and crushed them up and fed them to the chickens, because the shells are made out of calcium carbonate and it would fortify the eggs so that you'd get less of them broken in storage and transport. Here we have some purple glass that's been turned purple in the sun. Here's a cork top blue bottle, maybe like a pill bottle. And then here's some stone crock, and this one's speckled on the inside. So very good signs. You have to use your imagination here. There would have been a barn just on top of that hill. All coming down this hill, I see pieces of obsidian everywhere. And so that's a mystery, and I think I figured it out, but there's a ton of obsidian here, and obsidian doesn't occur naturally in Illinois. Let me show you. Alright, so there's obsidian all over the place out here, and here's some obsidian that I picked up right here. So obsidian comes from volcanoes, and the nearest place to find obsidian naturally occurring around here is about 1,000 miles away. So why is it that there's so much of it around here? There's an explanation, and it involves like the early farmers of this area. Take a close look here and you'll see that. So the early pioneers, or early farmers, they had to do their own blacksmithing. And back then the coal wasn't of pure quality, and there was lots of minerals and rocks mixed in with the coal. And so what happened is, when they put the coal in the blast furnace, some of the rocks and minerals got so hot that they actually metamorphosized, and you can see that in this residue from the coal furnace right here. Yeah, so the way that obsidian forms is it's lava that cools off extremely quickly, and the silicates that are in the lava don't have time to arrange themselves into crystalline structure, and so you get this really smooth, shiny, crystal-free version of silica, which is glass. This piece down here is outstanding. Yeah, so in the coal furnace, these rocks and minerals would get so hot that they would just melt down into the silicates, and then the guy that was doing the blacksmithing, he would just take all the coal residue and just throw it out in the icy, snowy ground, and that molten material would cool off so quickly that it would form a man-made version of obsidian, which is exactly what this is right here. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? So the person that owned this farm was named Holley, Holley, and according to the records, nobody named Holley lived here. This is nice. Whatever this is, that's real nice. I like it. So whoever Holley was, they didn't live here. They probably just owned the farm, And if you look at this map right here, if you look at this map, you'll see that everybody has their first initial and last name on the map, except for Holly. Whoever Holly was, they didn't have their first initial. So I think that the surveyors that came through here and they surveyed this farm, they didn't know who owned it. And so they went to the farmer down the road down there and said, who owns that? Farmer said, I don't know, it's somebody by the name of Holly. And then the surveyors just said, okay, whatever, just put down Holly. We have a lot of surveying to do. So I don't know what this is. It's some kind of cutting or grinding thing. Do you think it could be for like cutting the grain or like smashing the apples into applesauce or something like that? It looks pretty menacing, actually. All right, lots of pieces of the story coming together out here. This is the grounding rod to a barn. I don't know if it was the barn that was out here in 1860s and 70s, but this kept the barn from catching on fire when it got hit by lightning. Yeah, so there was a lightning rod on top of the barn, which connected to some wire, right? So like this right here. And then the wire connected to this solid copper rod, which was hammered into the ground. And then when lightning struck, the electricity would find the path of least resistance right through this, which means it traveled through the wire rather than through the wood, and the barn didn't catch on fire. So yeah, the lightning rod. It had to have been that tornadoes came through here, you know, once every decade and ripped apart some barns and stuff flew everywhere. I think that's why you find stuff scattered all over the field. But I've got another piece of evidence over there. Let's look at that. I think that this is a coffee can lid. Like that's the tin lid that the coffee came in. Coffee used to come in like a metal can. Very good find, my favorite find ever. I absolutely love when I find these, and this one looks super old. As soon as the shovel hit it, I was like, ooh, can it be? I can't believe it. Yes, this is great. That's my favorite find. It sounds good. And then when I dug down underneath of it, I saw this. That is really old. Outstanding. This is a handmade axe, like forged by somebody. I don't understand why it's crooked. Anyway, it's old. It's really old. The axe is crooked. It's bent. And looking at it, it looks really crude. I mean, that's gotta be, that's like 1850s, because the railroad didn't come through here until 1860s. And by that time you could buy an axe that was factory made. It may have been made in the 1840s or 50s and then lost in the 1870s. How about this one? Would you dig that sound? It's not very high. I know what it is, I can see it. So the land was owned by somebody named Holly, and I couldn't find any records of them at all. So it is not very much to talk about as far as genealogy is concerned. But here goes a spoon, look at that. You ever notice that for the people that metal detect, you ever notice that you find 25 spoons for every one fork? Why was that? Anyway, when you look at the map, you'll see two basic patterns when it comes to the properties. You had the property that was long and skinny, if you look at the map here, and then you had these properties that were actually square. And I think the reason for that is because when you had those big draft horses hooked up to the implements and the machinery, you didn't want to have to stop and turn around too often, because it took a lot to get the horses turned around, to keep the reins from getting all tangled up, to disengage all the levers of the machinery and make sure that nothing was still engaged and in gear. And it took so much to get the horses turned around that it became aggravating and frustrating, so that when you laid out your field, you made it very long and skinny so that you could go all the way to the end without having to turn around too frequently, because that was the propensity for chaos. Now the fields, the properties that were square, it's easy to fence off a square area. So I think that the square properties were fenced in pastures because they didn't need to be long and skinny, and the long and skinny properties were actually the farm fields. I just found another good clue over here as I was looking for the glove that I dropped on the ground. I can't find it even though it's orange. That's why I always wear orange gloves, but I found a good clue right over here. Look at this. For as small as this is right here, it's meaningful because it gives us a pretty good date as to some of the stuff that we're finding out here. So this right here is a broken piece of glass from the underside of a Boyd's fruit jar cap. It was like an early mason jar. And if you look at it, you can see that it's like kind of translucent. And when this was patented in 1869, for the first, 3 years, they were made translucent. And then later on, they became opaque glass. So the translucent ones are like 1869 through like 1871. You see what it is? You know, I try so hard to find coins and buttons, and I never hardly ever find any buttons. And if I can find this tiny little thing. This is an eyelet for a belt, I think. It's an eyelet for a belt, and it's just tiny. I found this. I also found that tiny little brass rivet right there. And so if I can find these tiny little things, why can't I find buttons? The coins I can understand. One theory is, and this is kind of stupid, is that a lot of the people that lived here were Amish, right? And so Amish people didn't wear buttons. But I don't think they called themselves Amish. They didn't know themselves as Amish. They just knew themselves as people. And so I think the story went that there was a time when buttons were like a sign of status because they were gold plated or they were decorative, you know. So to walk around with like a huge row of, you know, gleaming gold buttons, that was like a status symbol. And people that were religious Amish people, Mennonite people, they wanted to get away from that. So they just plain and simply said, you can't have buttons. Makes sense now. It wasn't the buttons that they were against. It was the status. They were definitely against that, and I don't think that they knew that they were Amish. That was just their world.